Manchester United against Manchester City. Baptism of fire for Michael Carrick, the new interim manager who has been unveiled to the public. He is going to be in charge until the end of the season. Steve Haaland, part of his coaching staff, Jonathan Woodgate and Johnny Evans there, as well as Travis Binion. So, Crook, you've had a couple of days now just to digest the news and think about what could happen next. What's your view on everything?
It's mixed, to be honest. Listen, I wish Michael Carrick all the best. I think he is obviously a club legend as a player. He did well enough in his interim spell in charge, 2 wins and a draw from 3 games when he replaced Ollie in the first place. And obviously what he did at Middlesbrough, I think gets overlooked at times, that they were 21st in the table when he took over. He led them to 4th that season. They made the playoffs. Yes, the league positions went backwards on the face of it after that, but you have to factor in that he was selling a lot of his best players, particularly when they finished 10th. They lost Latte Lath in the January transfer window, and that was basically their main source of goals. So good luck to him. I think he'll need it because the squad is disjointed. There's a lot of issues behind the scenes. I think there's quite a few disillusioned players in that dressing room that he's going to have to pick up, not least Bruno Fernandes, who I do think probably will leave at the end of the season. I think he will find a club in Europe willing to activate that release clause and go and join one of the big guns from the continent who are capable of challenging for trophies. Should a club of the size and stature of Manchester United have sacked their manager seemingly without a plan and are now on to their second interim boss of the season? The answer is obviously no. And I do think they'd have been better served leaving Ruben Amorim in situ until they had a definitive plan. I think maybe they'd still be in the FA Cup if they did that. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to Darren Fletcher, but the 2 games that he managed, they dropped points away at Burnley in a game where they had 30 shots and that they've been knocked out of the FA Cup. So you have to say again, INEOS have made a poor judgment, a poor decision. So I'm not particularly optimistic about the final 17 games of the season. And he's got a really tough introduction, hasn't he, Michael Carrick, with the Manchester derby. City only scored 10 last weekend and looked really good at Newcastle in midweek. And then Arsenal away in his second game in charge. So, yeah, he's going to need a bit of fortune.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some people will say, Scott, does it any of it really matter, bearing in mind that we're in a situation where they're out of both cups and they're sort of outside the top 5? The truth is actually they're only 1 point behind Brentford, who are 5th, and they're in 7th at the moment. And they're still within touching distance of the top 4. And the job has to be to try and target getting into the Champions League. That has to be their silverware, doesn't it, this season?
100%. I mean, to be fair to Crookie at the start of the season, you know, he predicted Manchester United to finish 5th, didn't he?
Yeah,
he did.
I mean, I said, I mentioned to you, and we were talking about, I was working on the Brighton game. I said, look, that 5th place is so much up for grabs. I do feel, though, with the Aston Villa and the season that they've had, I think Liverpool, even though they're a million miles from where they were last season, I credit to Arne Slot because he's finding a way to win games. That's all they have to do.
The top 4 is cemented, isn't it? The top 4 is not going to change.
And I do feel that Chelsea have the squad to finish 5th as well. I see that wry smile on your face there, Sam. And obviously we'll see how that goes. But that's the aim. That's the aim for Mickey Carrick. And as much as, and I said it last week on the pod, and Crookie said it, how can Manchester United, one of the, if not the biggest club in the world, sack the manager and not know what they're going to do? It's almost like a little kid having a tantrum, throwing the toys out the pram and saying, right, what do I do now? Where's my next toy? I mean, it's ridiculous. But I do think Mickey Carrick will bring a sense of calmness in the way that he did on the pitch as a player. And I think in the press conferences as well, I mean, there's already pressure being a Manchester United player, but there won't be any extra headlines coming out the back of what, say, a Ruben Amorim press conference was. So I think he will bring a real sense of calmness. And I think it's a great job opportunity for him, isn't it? Not for Manchester United, but to try and be a Premier League manager next season somewhere else.
Yes, and I think that's a great opportunity for Michael Carrick. And I think sometimes we sort of, get a little bit skiffy ourselves about the fact that we've got young British managers that are given great opportunities. Liam Rosenior is in charge of Chelsea. Michael Carrick is in charge of Manchester United. 2 English managers in charge of 2 of the biggest clubs in the country. That's an absolutely massive positive for British coaching. And I think we should sort of be happy about that in some way, shape or form. Actually, my wry smile wasn't about Chelsea getting into the top 5. I think that's what they should be aiming at too. My wry smile was the fact that Crook has told us that now the top 4 is cemented after he'd already told us that Liverpool had won the title. then Arsenal won the title, then Manchester City won the title, then Arsenal won the title again, and Liverpool have only got 35 points, Brentford have got 33, Newcastle 32, and Manchester United 32 as well. So, look, it's very tight for that fourth place. What does the future hold for INEOS and Manchester United? Because there's some financial concerns doing the rounds, Crook. And obviously, if they don't get in the Champions League next season, then that's going to impact them even further. Any sort of restructure, they need a serious restructuring. You know, they need more players coming into the group. You know, they can't keep being in a situation where they can't spend.
Yeah, although I don't think it's going to happen in this window. I know that the brief from the club is that if we identify players in this window that are good for the long term, then we'll sign them. But as I've said before, by hiring an interim manager, they've almost given themselves a free pass to skip this window. Not for the first time under the Glazer regime. We have to remember, for all the flack that INEOS and their cohorts get, the Glazers are still running the football club. I think they're going to be in town actually for this game at the weekend, which is interesting. So I don't think they're going to be active. They've obviously got players coming back into the squad now. Ahmad and Brian and Bumo are back at training after being knocked out of the AFCON, so they'll be available for the derby. So the squad does look a little bit stronger than it has in recent weeks. But the glaring omission is a Michael Carrick type player in midfield, and it has been since he left the football club as a player. So I don't think he'd dig his boots out and get himself fit for the Manchester derby. But I'll tell you what, it'll be a lot more mobile than Manuel Ugarte.
Do you think that the whole sort of Premier League communications staff got together at the beginning of January and wrote the same brief? We will go after targets in this window if there is a long-term opportunity and it arises. Every club say the same thing, right? I mean, Conor Gallagher was only signed by Tottenham because Bentancur got injured. They weren't going to do any business.
No.
And then they felt, oh, we need to pull the trigger on this because we're a little bit light in midfield. In fact, it was Thomas Frank, I think, that urged them to get him an extra midfield player. I mean, a lot of Premier League clubs are just pulling back the spending a little bit, which is quite interesting. I think that's because of the fact that players have become so very expensive that you can't afford to make a mistake anymore because you're lumbered with a contract for 3 or 4 years. And if you get the wrong player in, then you cause yourself all sorts of problems. So they want that time to do the due diligence during the summer window. What do you make about this obsession with Sir Alex Ferguson being around the place? A lot of people talking about the fact that, people are ringing him up to ask him if they can take the job and people suggesting that he's around too much and has too much influence. Is that just sort of chatter or is that a real thing? What's our view?
Well, I think Roy Keane was out of order with his wording, to describe the greatest manager probably in the history of English football as hanging around like a bad smell. I thought lacked a bit of class from Keano, and obviously that goes back to the feud that's been going on for a number of years now. But I do take the point that maybe Fergie's influence is too big. I don't think it's helpful. When you get Ole Gunnar Solskjaer coming in as manager and saying, well, I can't park in that parking space because it's the bosses. You've got Darren Fletcher saying, well, I needed his blessing. You don't really. And I think it's going to take a very strong character to emerge from that shadow. We saw it with Sir Matt Busby, hanging around the club and looming over managers. And really, it was only when Fergie came in that there was a boss who was willing to or able to work under that type of scrutiny. And he's there week in, week out. He's certainly at every home game. He travels a lot to away games. He's earned the right to go and enjoy his football. And obviously, he lost his wife recently, and maybe it's a bit of an escape. But I think if the hierarchy there is still leaning on him to help with the big decisions, I think that's wrong. I think they've got to start shaping their own future and therefore escape some of the past.
The big decision, of course, is who takes over during the summer. Do you think, Scott, that Michael Carrick is a candidate for that, or is this very much an interim position? And then when you look around the landscape of who could take the job, who are the elite managers that would be willing to work in the INEOS system, do you think?
Well, I mean, that's almost a contradiction in terms, isn't it? Elite managers working under the INEOS system. Look, I remember being in the studio with you a good few months ago, and I mentioned about Thomas Tuchel. And I can see you shaking your head, and it's not going to happen, and maybe it's not, but he's an elite manager who obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the World Cup. Mauricio Pochettino is a manager that I wanted to see longer as Chelsea manager. Carlo Ancelotti, obviously, all of those will be at the World Cup. We don't know what's going to happen post that. There's not many, Sam. And in terms of under the, we can talk about Manchester United, but also Chelsea, and then there's other owners who work in a similar way that perhaps just go under a little bit of the radar. You know, it's not as if they want full control. I was on with Danny Kelly and Charlie Baker yesterday, and Danny said, yeah, the days of, you know, the manager doing absolutely everything are long gone. I said, but it doesn't have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be one end of the spectrum to this end of the spectrum. It can be somewhere in the middle where the head coach is still really important and he's not being told by the medical staff, you have to take this player off after 60 minutes. And that manager then gets shouted at, you don't know what you're doing. You know, there has to be a more influence from the head coach. But, you know, of course, the up above and the structure needs to be absolutely right because a head coach can come and go at any given time. But I go back to Brighton and, you know, you and Quickie, what you talk about, Tony Bloom and the way they, you know, they know what they're doing a year ahead. They're ahead of the game. And this is a Manchester United group right now that look like they're just going from day to day to day.
The problem we've got is there's so much money in football now, right? So the people that own the clubs are so rich and they're so used to having their own way and calling the shots that a lot of them actually are very much involved in the operation. Tony Bloom, Matthew Benham, two examples of probably what we would consider to be the better run clubs, are very, very hands-on on what happens at those football clubs. If you go across the whole spectrum now, there's a lot of owners with big egos that want to say on how things happen day to day, but also what happens on the football pitch. You know, they want to make sure that their assets are protected. They want to make sure that they play in a certain way. They want to be able to change it if they don't like it. And that comes with instability. So you are at the whim of a lot of one-man bands. You know, at the top of Aston Villa, you've got two big characters, but they very much have a day-to-day influence on what happens at that football club. Okay, Unai Emery's given the control, but they have the vision, they have the drive, they're the ones that set the agenda. You've got Arsenal, obviously, is run by Josh Kroenke now, but Dad's very much involved. However, they've stepped back and allowed control to go to Mikel Arteta, and because he's been allowed to do his job, he's managed to formulate a team and a cohesive structure that has helped his team going forward. We know that Pep has a lot of freedom. But again, that ownership model is not perfect. There's not many clubs that you can walk around and go, that's the perfect structure. I'd like to work in that. And I wonder whether or not that puts off quite a lot of head coaches, from like experienced ones, from getting involved.
Yeah, I think so. And it's something we've debated a lot, the role of the sporting director. But I mean, Manchester United is such an interesting case study. Actually, it was one of our colleagues on The Athletic who recently said that, you know, Chelsea and United fall over themselves to compete for the title of biggest basket case club in the Premier League. And yeah, I get his point. Certainly, they're the two that give us the most talking points. But ultimately, the problem here was not Ruben Amorim. It wasn't Erik ten Hag. It wasn't Louis van Gaal. It wasn't Jose Mourinho. The problem is the ownership structure at Manchester United, and it's INEOS who are bearing the brunt of that. But as I've mentioned already, the Glazers still have overall control. They're not that interested in sporting success as long as the coffers keep coming in, and they always will, because the stadium is full every week. The megastore, they're queuing out the block. They're still a global superpower, Manchester United. So ultimately, whoever is in charge is going to have his hands tied because they're not interested in attracting the superstars. And it's becoming harder. Because if you're Anton Semenyo and you've got a choice to join Manchester City or Manchester United, as he did, unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, you're going to pick City.
I'm really pleased you're coming round to my way of thinking, because I think we had a big, heated discussion about exactly this on this podcast about 8 to 10 weeks ago, when I explained to you, I was going on about the fact that everything's always scrutinised about the manager and the players and also, but actually it's the ownership structure. And the Glazers, by the way, are guilty as well, and INEOS, of not managing this club properly for a very long time.
I know United and Chelsea are seen as basket cases, but at least the Chelsea multi-billionaires know what they're doing. They have a plan, whether you agree with it or whether you don't. They know what they want to do. And I think they should be a little bit more transparent to the fans. You know, is it about just selling players and on a short and long term? And if trophies come along the way, then so be it. And not so much trophies ASAP. But they know what they're doing. There is a clear plan there. With Manchester United, there's no obvious plan. It looks like they're just fumbling around in the dark.
They will need an obvious plan at the weekend when they take on Manchester City, who were impressive in midweek against Newcastle United. Antoine Semenyo, as you've already mentioned, brilliant signing, and he's hit the ground running, 2 goals in 2 starts for his new club. Difficult to contain. If he plays on the right-hand side again this week, Crook, Patrick Dorgu versus Semenyo, who wins that battle?
Well, will it be Patrick Dorgu? It'd be Luke Shaw, wouldn't it? In part of a back four.
I don't know.
With Dorgu on the bench. I mean, yeah, it's a frightening prospect because Antoine Semenyo has settled easily, hasn't he, into life as a Manchester City player. A goal and assist at the weekend, a goal and another chalked off in midweek. So no danger of him taking time to find his feet at a big club in the Premier League. And I think the United team selection will be fascinating because we think it will be a back four, and I think it will be Shaw and Dalot as the fullbacks. I would imagine Harry Maguire will come back in now that he's fit because Lenny Yoro has been struggling in recent weeks for his performances. But what does he do going forward, Michael Carrick? Because he almost got too many players to shoehorn in. You've got Mason Mount, you've got Benjamin Šeško, you've got Mateus Cunha, who I thought was poor last weekend and might well find himself on the bench, but he is a big game player. We saw that at Anfield. But obviously you've got Brian Mbeumo coming back into the team as well. You've got Ahmad. That's 5 players in a 4-2-3-1 formation. A couple of those are going to have to be left out, aren't they?
Yeah, well, look, Mbeumo and Ahmad, we don't know the prognosis of whether or not they're 100% fit or what the situation is with them after coming back from AFCON. I know you were a little bit annoyed that Mbeumo didn't come back quicker because they were out on, I think, Friday night, weren't they? And then Manchester United played on the Sunday, and you thought that maybe he could have rushed back and been there a little bit quicker. Crook and I were once at Fratton Park. Yakubu, who was coming back from international duty at the AFCON with Nigeria, had been knocked out, I think, the day before, so in the afternoon of the day before. And he flew back overnight to get back to play in a game on a Sunday for Portsmouth. And he was registered as a substitute when the team sheet went in, despite not being at the ground, and then travelled down the touchline with his boots in his hand midway through the first half to go and sit on the bench. Absolutely terrific, by the way. He ran down the touchline, into the tunnel, got changed, came back out, sat on the bench, and then played second half. Fantastic. Great story.
Can I just ask a question? Which one of those two, if Crookie played for his country and then had to come back quickly, do you think he would have done? Walk straight back, boots in hand, or do you think he might have had a little night out?
He might have been the Ryan Aitnori missed my connection. Ryan Cherky, brilliant goal in midweek, played really well. He's done fantastic for Manchester City. He'd be a real threat, actually. Is there any concern, Scott, about Erling Haaland? 1 goal from open play in 6 games. Hardly touched the ball on Tuesday night.
Yeah, he's rubbish, isn't he?
No one said he was rubbish. Just, if you know, new players, getting used to them, different circumstances.
Massive concern for the opposition because at some point he's going to hit a hat-trick. Whether it's going to be this one, I'm not quite sure. I mean, United, even though for years now they've been the more inferior side, have found ways, you can say against Liverpool as well, to get great results. So trying to avoid the sort of cliche, you know, the form goes out the window, but actually the top players can lift themselves for these particular games. And I think it's going to be interesting. But look, City are the much better side. You know, Ryan Cherky is playing fantastic. Semenyo settled in really well. You know, there's Phil Foden. Obviously, there's a problem in defence, but they didn't look like there was a problem in defence at St James's Park. And Erling Haaland, we know, is one of the top 3 strikers in world football, and will smash records wherever he goes, and will beat Alan Shearer's record if he stays long enough. And he doesn't even have to stay as long as Alan Shearer did. So no, not a problem at all. Top class striker. He'll be on the score sheet very, very soon.
Okay, predictions then. Crook, what's your scoreline for Saturday lunchtime live on talkSPORT?
I think the best United can hope for is a draw with the atmosphere whipped up by Michael Carrick's return as interim manager. The fact that City defensively don't look great, and you look at their back four, it's by no means first choice because of the injuries. And obviously they've got Ahmad and Mbeumo coming back into the team. So I'm gonna optimistically predict that it will finish 2-2.
Scott?
So he's not hiding behind the sofa for this particular one, but I'm going to go 2-1 City. They've got, we've said this before though, but they have got far too much class for United.
Yeah, I think it might be an absolute humdinger. I'm going to go for 3-2 Manchester City because I think it will be sort of like, as Crook says, full of atmosphere. There'll be a lot of people trying to prove a point. You've got those wide attacking players coming back. Manchester United do score goals. City do leak them and score them, so it could be a bit of a shootout. We look forward to it. It's live on talkSPORT 12:30 this Saturday lunch.